Good evening, everybody. I'm Karen Sander, the Director of Public Programs for the CUNY Graduate Center. We are so delighted to have you join us here tonight, what promises to be a thought-provoking conversation on the future of Penn Station. I'd like to offer welcome to those of you who are here in person, but also welcome our large online audience who are tuning in from places around the globe. For those of you who are tuning in from outside of the New York area, you may not have had the distinct pleasure of trying to catch a train in Penn Station. It is kind of a true test of your New York City grit, especially on a holiday or a Friday in the summer. For tonight's program, we are pleased to partner with the City Club of New York, who promotes thoughtful urban land use policy through public discussion. We're also grateful to our own Center for Urban Research, headed up by John Mollenkopf, for co-sponsoring tonight's event. Our many research centers and our more than 30 departments that offer graduate programs in this building continually focus on ways that research and scholarship can inform and educate the public. Now, it is my pleasure to turn the stage over to Layla Law-Gisiko, President of the City Club of New York, who will offer a 10-minute presentation on the issues around Penn Station. She will then turn the evening over to our esteemed panel to further discuss. During the last portion of the evening, we will take questions from our in-person audience that you can write on the cards that you have been handed as you enter. So, Layla, it's your turn.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight to discuss this big question: what is next for Penn Station? I'm Layla Law-Gisiko. I'm the president of the City Club of New York, and I'm thrilled to help facilitate this conversation on what is arguably the nation's most critical infrastructure project. First, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our hosts, the CUNY Graduate Center, for their partnership that has been essential in making this evening possible. Now, they say that Rome was not built in a day, and neither was Penn Station. So, will Penn Station ever rematch Rome's grandeur? Can Penn deliver the right functionality with the right vision and proper investment? So before we dive into our conversation with our wonderful panel, I will give you a 5-minute presentation just to orient ourselves and bring us up to speed on Penn Station's journey so far. The future of Penn Station, but before we jump into the future, let's talk a little bit about the past. Once upon a time, Penn Station had a grand presence as a train hub. Penn Station was built in 1910. It was designed by McKee, Mead & White in the Beaux-Arts style. Pennsylvania Railroad sold Penn Station in 1963 to cut losses from declining passenger rail service. The land was repurposed for Madison Square Garden and an office complex. The original Penn Station was not really demolished, rather it was decapitated, leaving the current underground station to its misery with a capacity of 200,000 passengers. But starting in the 80s, commuter rail trends shifted, leading to increased ridership. And by 2000, the station was serving over 600,000 commuters daily, making it the busiest train station in the Western Hemisphere. Penn Station today is cramped, crowded, dark, and the delays are frequent. The platforms are narrow and congested, with columns from Madison Square Garden and to Penn obstructing passenger flow. But Penn Station is not only a train station we love to hate. It is also the heart of a complex rail network where the Northeast Corridor and our regional commuter rail network intersect. The Northeast Corridor is a 457-mile route operated by Amtrak that connects Boston to Washington, D.C. It supports a $2.6 trillion economy. The regional commuter rail network around New York is operated by Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, and Metro-North. Long Island Railroad is the #1 commuter rail operator in the country with 385 miles of track. tracks. Metro North, the second busiest commuter rail, has 319 miles of tracks. New Jersey Transit, the third busiest commuter rail service, has 954 miles of tracks and 164 stations. Combined, they serve over 800,000 commuters daily. Out of these 800 commuters, 75% end up at Penn Station. The system is not unified nor connected. There are currently 4 major rail and infrastructure projects related or connected to Penn Station: the Hudson Tunnel Project, the Penn Station expansion, the Penn Station reconstruction, and Penn Access. So let's go over them one by one. The Hudson River Project aims to build 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River and then repair the existing tunnels which were badly damaged during Superstorm Sandy. The goal of the projects are redundancy, resiliency, and reliability. It is not a capacity expansion project. Construction of the new Hudson River Tunnel starts this year and has a completion date of 2035. The existing tubes will be rehabilitated by 2038, and the project has a total tab of $16 billion, and this is fully funded. The long-term vision and near-term capital investment plan for the Northeast Corridor calls for a capacity expansion of New York Penn Station, and the goal is to double the capacity under the Hudson River. So it would bring the rail service during peak hour from 24 to 48 trains per hour. So what does it take to actually expand passenger capacity at Penn Station? Well, that's the million-dollar question, or the billion-dollar question, we should say. Can the current footprint accommodate the projected capacity? Should the station expand its physical footprint? And if so, where? To the north, to the south, or underneath Penn Station? Can the station tracks and platforms be reconfigured to permit capacity expansion with improved efficiency? Multiple plans have been conceived and tested. One of them, the southern expansion, would add a new terminal with tracks and platforms designed as a stub-end station. The estimated cost range for that would be between $12 and $16.6 billion. The expansion would require entirely demolishing Block 780 and some buildings to the east and west of it. Another modality, through running, would reconfigure tracks and platforms, allowing trains to continue east to Long Island or north to the Bronx, all within the station's existing footprint. So what is through running? Lots of people may not be familiar with this modality. Through running allows trains to actually travel beyond Penn Station, like hopping on a train in Newark and reaching Jamaica, Queens, or traveling from New Brunswick to the Bronx once Penn Access is completed. It's not new to Penn Station. Amtrak trains actually through run from Washington, D.C. to Boston, and New Jersey Transit trains through run to Sunnyside, Queens, where they actually park during the off-peak hours. These trains just don't carry passengers when they do it. So the other big project is the Penn Station reconstruction. It focuses on improving the train halls, enhancing user experience with better wayfinding and increased daylight access, but it will not affect the platforms. The tab for this project that is led by MTA is budgeted at $7 billion. ASTM, a private company, has presented a design alternative for the reconstruction of Penn Station using the same scope as the MTA. Together, Penn reconstruction and Penn expansion price tag flirts with the $20 billion, making it the largest current infrastructure project in the country. Another large project, Penn Access, is the Metro North New Haven line extension. That will connect New Haven to Penn Station, where currently the trains from New Haven are going to Grand Central Terminal. This new line will have stops along the way in the Bronx. This project is actually under construction and is fully funded. A related project to Penn Station is the Penn Station General Project Plan, or GPP. The GPP is a real estate plan introduced by then Governor Cuomo and continued on by Governor Hochul. The project proposes to bulldoze 6 city blocks to make way for super tall office towers. The project is currently in limbo, and it has been decoupled from Penn Station. Challenges abound with Penn Station, no doubt, but there is general agreement about these challenges, although the ways to overcome diverges greatly. And back to Rome. This is a billboard installed by the city of Boston when the Big Dig was ongoing, and it reads, "Rome was not built in a day. If it was, we would have hired their contractor." Rome wasn't built in a day, neither will Penn Station. Building infrastructure is complicated. Rome turned okay. Cities worldwide have successfully tackled major rail projects, proving that with smart planning and collaboration, Penn Station can find its way back to greatness. So now I would like to invite the panel to join me on stage, if you can make your way here. And as we are about to run through tonight's dialogue, I am pleased to introduce our fantastic panel of experts. I am really, really excited to introduce Karim Ahmed, senior consultant with ReThink NYC, who's designed a unified regional rail network around New York City. Liam Blank, who is representing Tri-State Transportation Campaign, a leading advocate for sustainable transit. Rachael Fauss, Senior Policy Advisor with ReInvent Albany, who champions transparency and accountability in public funding. Petra Messick, Amtrak Senior Program Director of the Gateway Program. And Robert Paaswell, former CEO of the Chicago Transit Authority, with a wealth of experience in complex infrastructure projects. Tonight, the conversation will be moderated by Nolan Hicks, contributor and columnist for New York Magazine's Curbed section. He's also a researcher at the NYU Marin Institute for Urban Management. Nolan, take it away.
Excellent, great. Good evening, CUNY. Good, excellent. All right, so we're going to start talking about the most talked about urban project in America, which is Penn Station, which is everybody's been talking about for the better part of 60 years, ever since they knocked down the top of the old one and put it underground. So we're going to start with a little icebreaker, just so you can meet all the panelists who were just introduced. We're going to start with Professor Paaswell here, who's going to tell us a little bit about his time at the CTA and why, obviously, the Mets are the superior baseball team.
I'm a Yankee fan, actually. But I've had, as you mentioned, I was the head of the CTA for Harold Washington when he was mayor of Chicago. My career has primarily been academic. I started in academia in the 60s. Built transportation research centers at SUNY Buffalo and at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been at City College, first running the University Transportation Research Center, and I've basically retired from that position, but still active and rabble-rousing, as you'll see. And I thank everyone for giving us the opportunity to talk about why we don't want to rebuild something to look like it did in 1910. And I think that's one of the focuses we'll talk about.
Petra, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, starting with Yankees versus Mets?
Oh, I'm actually a Cardinals fan. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
What league are they in?
Central, when they were in the Central or when they were in the West?
Central West, I think. Yeah, it's been years, but yeah, they don't come on TV up here. So, well, let's see. I'm an urban and regional planner by training. I've been working in New York since the turn of the century. I started my career at Regional Plan Association, was involved in the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site and various advocacy efforts. I joined Amtrak in 2012 on the day that Superstorm Sandy made landfall in New York City. That was an exciting day and a momentous day for Amtrak because we had so much unfortunate damage to the North River Tunnel, the East River Tunnels, Thankfully, the salt water did not enter Penn Station, which would have wreaked unbelievable havoc on the delicate railroad systems in the station, but the water went down into the tunnels. And that really fueled the impetus for the Gateway program, which is the program that I work on, which is a generational infrastructure investment program focused on the 10 miles just west of Penn Station between Newark, New Jersey and New York Penn Station. And it's where our busiest passenger railroad in the nation, which is 4 and 6 tracks in many of the areas from Boston to Washington, narrows to just 2 tracks in one of the busiest, most congested section of the corridor. So it's 450 daily trains between Amtrak and New Jersey Transit that cross the Hudson. It's where all the New Jersey Transit lines converge to access Penn. And the Gateway program aims to renew the infrastructure, which is over 100 years old, built by the Pennsylvania Railroad as an intercity railroad, not a commuter railroad, and replace bridges, repair and augment tunnels, and expand capacity by adding another 2 tracks. So we can go from a 2-track to a 4-track mainline railroad in our busiest section.
We're going to get to that in a little bit,
Okay.
but I have to introduce everybody. I'm so sorry. Rachael Fauss is the numbers expert. Anyone who's ever written about transit in New York City has Rachael on speed dial, mostly to tell us, no, you can't bond against an IOU. And Rachael, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and if we could keep it just start Yankees versus Mets, a little bit about yourself, and let's do it in under a minute.
I don't follow sports ball, but if you had to say something, I'd say I've been to many a PTA game at the Cyclones, Coney Island Cyclones. Anyone? Okay.
All right.
Is that a good one?
She's
All
a real
right.
one.
But I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much to City Club, Graduate Center, CUNY. I'm a proud SUNY Albany grad, so I love public education. And I think the way that my organization, ReInvent Albany, looks at the Penn Station projects is really through a lens of governance, transparency, and accountability. And I hear it a lot from people, oh, you like transparency for transparency's sake. But no, the reason we think that transparency is important, especially when you're talking about $7 billion, $13 billion, is, who pays? How are they paying? Is it fair? And are we getting the best bang for the buck? Because this is our money. This is public dollars. So that's kind of the lens that I bring here, and I'm really happy to talk more about this later.
We're thrilled to have you. All right, Liam, Yankees, Mets, and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I don't follow sports, but
Real epidemic of that around here.
my background's in urban planning and public policy, and today I had the most amazing experience on Amtrak. I actually, to explain why I look like this, I actually had to sit for 5 hours in 30th Street Station with electric overhead wires down south of 30th Street Station, but I was upgraded for free to an Amtrak Acela and basically skipped every stop from Philadelphia all the way to New York. And I thought this was exactly the type of seamless, the system working for me experience that I should be having, though I had to run from Penn Station to here to still make it in time.
Though minus the 5-hour delay.
I'm so sorry you were delayed.
No,
All
it was
right.
actually a great experience for Amtrak.
All right, Karim, I'm going to hope that you are a baseball fan and can continue the trend, but you're not.
I mostly don't like. I live and work in the Bronx, and Yankee Stadium is between my house and my studio, and so I dislike the Yankees for the traffic and the congestion.
That is a valid reason to dislike the Yankees.
And the subway changes that happen at 161st Street on the D as they go uptown, where they mess up the express schedule. So that's my only reason for disliking
Hates the Yankees, hates the game train. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, by education and by profession, I'm an architect. I joined ReThink in 2016, and I worked mainly on construction feasibility and cost analyses. I later kind of transitioned more to some of the transit and urban planning aspects. Had the pleasure of consulting with a lot of wonderful experts, Dr. Vukan Vucek, who basically implemented through running in Philadelphia, and also wonderful engineers from WSP like Drew Galloway and Foster Nichols, and later Dr. Paaswell here. And after we published the plan after we published ReThink's plan, I started doing more advocacy work, started meeting with community organizations, elected officials and the railroads, trying to understand the challenges and opportunities of through running.
And with that, let's begin with the discussion of Penn Station. So we're going to be talking a lot of different numbers tonight. The numbers are going to be quite large, but there's a couple that you should keep in your mind. One of which is right now, as the station is currently configured, with the 2 existing tracks under the Hudson River, 24 trains an hour at peak can cross from Newark into New York City and go back the other direction. So that's 48 movements, 24 to the east, 24 to the west. That is half the number of movements that you get under the East River, where you can have 48 trains, give or take, heading to the east to Long Island or up to New Haven, and then 48 coming into Penn Station from the west. The other set of numbers you should remember are everything we're talking about is expensive. We're talking about stuff that could cost a few $1 billion, or we're talking about stuff that could cost a few times a few $1 billion. And so with those disclosures in mind, I want to sort of lay the framework out and just repeat what Layla said. The city of New York has a traffic crisis. It's why tomorrow the governor is expected to unveil the congestion pricing proposal yet again. The proposal will be set for $9, but there's a traffic crisis in the city, and every single person who's on a train is a person who's not in a car. The Gateway Tunnel project is a crucial resiliency project, but it offers the opportunity to double the number of tracks under the Hudson River, and thus opens the door to double the number of tracks coming into the Hudson River from New Jersey, potentially doubling the number of trains from New Jersey. Think about how large a commuter train is. A commuter train can carry, give or take, 1,000 people. So if you're doubling the number of commuter trains, that's 20 more trains. You're talking about an additional 20,000 people an hour who can get into the city who otherwise cannot. That's cars off the street, that's pollution out of the air. New York has some of the worst asthma rates in the country, and perhaps just as importantly, fewer cars on the road means less carbon in the atmosphere, which means we cook the planet less, and that is also of huge importance. So that's the framework for what we're going to talk about tonight, which is how can we best deliver at the lowest possible price and at the quickest timeline more trains into Penn Station. And with that, let's begin with let's start with Petra. Petra, what's Amtrak's plan to double the number of trains coming under the Hudson River to get cars off the street and pollution out of the air?
I'm so glad you asked. And by the way, kudos to both you and Layla for framing the issues so accurately and so concisely. It's really excellent introduction. And I have nothing really to refine on the statements that you've made so far. So before you politely cut me off because I was going on too long about the Gateway program,
I'm very sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize. It was completely appropriate.
I've been strictly told we must stay
I
on or close
appreciate
to
that.
schedule.
I was told 2 minutes, and it was longer than that. I got carried away because I like to talk about the Gateway program, and that is essentially the plan to double rail capacity and expand train service into Manhattan, both commuter service and intercity rail Amtrak service. We accomplished that through a series of projects. So Hudson Tunnel project is underway, is fully funded, has started construction. The Portal North Bridge project, which hasn't been mentioned, is replacing a notorious swing bridge in the Meadowlands. That is also close to 70% complete. They're floating down one of the spans from Ravenna, New York, right before Thanksgiving, and are going to install it. It's truly impressive. So your train won't get stuck. I know that's not where Liam got stuck today, but your train won't get stuck behind the Portal Bridge. Then once we get into Penn, we need more track capacity. So we have been looking at various options for expanding concourse track capacity within Manhattan to connect to the new tunnel. And this has been referred to. We're looking at options to expand to the south. There's potentially an option to expand to the north. We've studied through running extensively. We recently published a report which explained that through running wouldn't meet our goal of adding an additional 24 trains per hour. And you can find that on the website pennstationcomplex.info, where we're publishing information about the Penn Station projects. And then, in addition to expanding Penn Station, which we'll come back to, I'm sure, and the planning process has just begun, there's a series of other projects that need to be built in New Jersey as well. The Portal South Bridge, which would be a second 2-track bridge over the Hackensack River. We need to add some track capacity to Secaucus Junction Station. There's a project called the Bergen Loops, which would connect the lower level with the upper level of Secaucus Junction and allow those New Jersey Transit lines that also serve Orange and Rockland County, New York, to have a 1-seat ride into Manhattan. You do all that, plus some other resiliency projects that are underway, you can expand the service. And New Jersey Transit can add frequencies to satisfy the relentless growth of their ridership since the mid-90s. Amtrak can add trains and expand to new markets. So that's the plan. But I'll just say one thing before I pass it along.
Sure.
Gateway was always designed in anticipation of multiple political cycles, different presidential administrations, gubernatorial administrations, to be implemented over time. The plan is comprehensive, and the projects secure funding and get commitments one by one, and it will take time. That's why I called it generational. So we do need all those projects to deliver the full capacity. We can eke out incremental benefits as we go along to resiliency or to a small amount of capacity, but ultimately it is a suite, a program that needs to fully be implemented, and it will cost tens of billions of dollars.
And credit to Petra for coming, because I've written some columns and I'm sure she wasn't a fan of them, and I do appreciate you being here to make sure that Amtrak's perspective is on stage. In those columns, I've asked the question whether or not Amtrak is doing a good enough job considering what the existing complex is capable of. And you've mentioned a couple of the different ideas that were studied in the document. And we'll circle back to those in a little bit. But Professor, you are an expert on civil engineering and on planning. What do you make of Amtrak's assessment of what the Penn Station complex is capable of, both as configured and for potential for reconfigurement in the broader envelope?
Well, I think it really doesn't go far enough. And I think the real question should be asked is, do we want to rebuild a Penn Station like the 1910, 1936 station, because it's beautiful and it reminds us of ancient Rome, which we really don't need?
Ancient Rome, it famously worked out.
Right. Or do we want to think of the future, where we want something digital, something that's IT efficient, something where somebody can say, I'm going to leave now from the Graduate Center, and I want to hop a train to Washington or to Norfolk or to New Haven, get on my iPhone or other kind of phone or whatever you have. My granddaughters know how to use those. And get the ticket, know where to go, know where Penn Station is, know how to maneuver through it, know where the tracks are, and know that the trains are also scheduled by computers and as they are in the European Union. I think there's two things that are missing from this. One is, I'm an advocate of high-speed rail, and I think if New York is not the central part of high-speed rail for the Northeast of the United States, we're going to be missing out on our competition with the European Union and with Asia, and it's something we better look at very carefully. The thought, any of you who've traveled to Europe, you can go to a station in London or Paris or Rome, and you can find out when the next train is. It will be there on time. You'll know where to wait on the platform, and the train will get to its station on time, and you'll have the ticket. We don't have that ability here yet because we're bogged down in all the red tape of how we used to do things, and the plans that Amtrak has are terrific, but I heard that when I came to New York in 1990 when the Port Authority said, let's work on access to the region's core. It isn't much different. So there's too much red tape, too much inertia that has to be overcome.
So Rachel, this brings us to the question of both inertia, which is the bureaucracy's ability to function, which also begs the question of money. The tunnels are going to be $16 billion. The Penn Station expansion, as sort of currently configured, whether it's the 2011 version, whether it's the 2017 version, whether it's the version that was we'll get to that piece of it in a second, but it's an expensive proposition. So if the tunnels are $16 billion, and if a new train hall before even getting the bids out is estimated to be $16 billion, and we saw what happened to Grand Central Madison, which was a similarly complex project where that went from 4 billion to 12 billion, and it took 25 years. One, can we do it? And two, can we afford it?
So I think that we have something coming up, I think, on Penn reconstruction. Hopefully, we'll have a sense of the cost soon. It's worth noting that the MTA's...
And it's important to note that Penn reconstruction is entirely separate from Penn expansion,
yes,
too.
Yes. So Penn reconstruction really is the New York State part of this, the MTA part of this, in that they are taking a lead, working with Amtrak, working with New Jersey Transit. I mean, I will just say that from a governance perspective, you can't get much more complicated than New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, MTA, New York City, New York State, MSG, Vornado. You can add however many acronyms you want to that, but this is all very complicated, and those all require funding agreements on all of those parts. So, it's a question of can we do it, but it's also how and who's paying. And as far as the Penn reconstruction piece is the one that we follow the most at ReInvent Albany as a statewide group, the design is still being finished. So the MTA is working on the design, and last I've heard, a new proposal for design, we may see something about it in November. It's not in the MTA's capital plan yet. The MTA has a capital plan for 2025 to 2029. It's not in there yet, so we don't actually have a final price tag yet. So I'm not deflecting from your question, but it's hard to answer the question of how much can we afford it, and when we don't actually have a final price tag yet.
Well, I mean, let's take sort of the public estimates. It's 7 billion plus 16 billion plus another 16 billion. So right there we're at 40-ish billion, if I'm doing the math in my head correctly, in work directly related to Penn Station.
Yeah.
Can we, that seems like just an absolutely mind-boggling number.
I think because it's going to take a long time. I think that's the answer. Anytime you have a project of this magnitude, it's going to take a long time. There's $1.3 billion for Penn Station in New York State's budget. But that's one small piece of it. And with the plan, the general project plan being decoupled, that is, again, less money that, uncertainty about how New York State might fund the rest of its portion.
So this sort of leads us into the moral impetus or the discussion of through running. So through running is sort of a two halves question. It's a way to run schedules that allows you to reduce the conflicts in the station. And by reducing the conflicts in the station, you expand the capacity in the station. And the fight is a fight over time. So the average time an Amtrak train spends in Penn Station is give or take 30-ish minutes, I think is the headway that has to get written into the schedule.
It really depends on the type of service.
Sure. Yeah, the Jersey Transit is something close to that for their stub-in terminals, but the pass-throughs are
more like
quicker.
17 to 23.
Yeah, and the LIRR is quicker than that. So if as we have this conversation, I just want everyone in the room and everyone at home to sort of keep this in mind. What we're having a conversation about is a conversation about time, which is how long should things take, how long do things take, and can efficiencies be taken in time to improve throughput? Sort of in the same way that Andy Byford made the subways faster by cutting 5 or 10 seconds off of every stop. And if you're on the A train and you're making 35 or 40 stops going from the end of the line in Ozone Park all the way up to Morningside Heights, 10 seconds at every stop adds up. So this is the context for the conversation that we're having. And this is the context for whether or not more trains can fit into Penn Station in the existing envelope. In order for more trains to fit into the station, you have to make the station more efficient. And that means fixing the platforms. The platforms that exist right now are so narrow, you have to get everyone off of the train, get them upstairs, and then you can board everyone getting on the train again. And that takes a lot of time. So how many people here have been to Jamaica Station? All right. You know at Jamaica Station, you got everybody getting off and getting on at the same time like you do on the subway? No, think about how much quicker that is than how long it takes to get on and off a train at Penn Station. So as we talk about through running, it's talking about turning Penn Station, whether in part or in whole, into a complex that looks and operates a lot more like Jamaica than the Penn Station we know today. So this is the reference point for everyone. And with this reference point, there are two plans that have been put out independent of Amtrak considering through running. Amtrak has a proposal that it developed internally, and we'll talk about all three. But I would like to start with, I think, the most aggressive of the proposals, and that was the proposal brought up by ReThink. And if you could just sort of walk everyone through in the room, just sort of real fast, what you guys would do to Penn Station and how exactly it would all work.
Sure. So ReThink's proposal for Penn Station, put in a nutshell, is to cover every other track and expand the platforms over those tracks. Just show of hands, people who've been inside of New York Penn Station. Okay, great. So you're familiar that every platform has 2 tracks on either side. So essentially, one of those tracks, you'd have the platform extend over. And what that does is make wider platforms, fewer tracks. Sounds a little counterintuitive, we're actually getting rid of tracks, but the fact is that with a wider platform, you have a lot more space for vertical circulation, which relates to the point that Nolan made earlier about Jamaica Station. There's also width to stage, so you have space to actually circulate, which is what gives you the ability to operate trains with a faster throughput.
So remember, it's sort of the idea about time. So if the average amount of time an Amtrak or a Jersey Transit train spends in the station is 20 or 30 minutes, to make the ReThink proposal work, getting rid of half the tracks, but widening the platforms, how much time would a train spend in Penn Station under the ReThink proposal?
Approximately 6 minutes for what we call, we've been borrowing Amtrak's terms because they've been kind of setting the standard for a lot of the language. What we call through-running trains, they call suburban trains, right?
We'll get to that in a second.
Regional metro, I'm sorry. Regional metro, not suburban.
We'll get to that in a second. But the average amount of time to make ReThink's plan work is the train would have to be able to get in and get out of the station in 6 minutes. All right. Liam, you're the author of a different proposal. It treats the station sort of as it's currently configured. So if you've been to Penn Station, there's the southern end, which is the Jersey Transit end, and you get into it through the pit of despair. And then you have the sort of the central section, which is the Amtrak section. Amtrak operates out of the beautiful new Moynihan Hall, and that's where you get on those central tracks. And then you go to sort of the north end of the station, and you have the Long Island Railroad portion of the station on sort of the northern end of the tracks. Now, during the commute times, the tracks get split and portions of the station get shared and all, but that's sort of the basic structure of the station. You have a southern end, you have a central section, and you have a northern section. And Liam, your plan preserves that, but with some tweaks. So walk us through your plan briefly, if you could.
Very simply, the idea was that if the railroads were going to say that it was going to be too disruptive to be able to do the wholesale reconstruction of Penn Station all at once, or even in a phasing strategy, that we would then just build a additional 2-track, 1-platform expansion, so something that could be scaled up if it needed to be.
And this is on the southern end, or where?
And this was on the southern end, so specifically handling more cross-Hudson capacity. But essentially, following the ReThink plan, doing a staged approach for implementing through running, but giving them also the capacity to be able to stage it and not have to have the 30% disruption that they are.
And what does your plan do to the central section? So you're adding tracks to the southern section. What does it do to the middle section?
So it provides the staging area. The expansion provides the staging area for widening the central platforms of the station, which is what the ReThink plan is essentially doing. But we used the MTA's actual plan that they put forth in the CATQUAG meeting, the Community Advisory Working Group meeting, where they said that they had developed their own version of through running that worked. And so I said, okay, we'll take your version that you say works, and then we pretty much, as you said, stapled it together with the New Jersey Transit plan that a friend of mine who works in New Jersey Transit said, hey, you should take a look at this. This might work.
This is through running, sort of broadly explained. It's an aim to reduce the amount of time trains spend in station, to improve the throughput. And Professor, this is something that happens fairly normally across the planet.
I wanted to add, it makes it much more integrative. Penn Station, as Petra mentioned, is not only for those of us that still call it the Pennsylvania Railroad, but we know it's Amtrak, and New Jersey Transit, and Long Island Railroad, which was once part of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and the MTA lines. And you want to make it integrative so that it's very easy to move from one line to another. And I think that's the whole purpose. Through running just facilitates that. Through running should be one attribute of modernization of the station. I was talking about you want a 21st, 22nd century station. You don't want the old Penn Station was great, McKim was great, he designed Low Library at Columbia, blah, blah, blah. But we really want the next century's architects and engineers to design a station for people that are in a sense digitally connected. But I wanted to add one more caution because you keep throwing out the word cost.
Yes.
But there's another half of that. It's called benefits.
Sure.
You have 600,000 people a day. That's 600,000 people a day. That's more people going through Penn Station than are the populations of most cities in the United States. Yes. And what is transportation? It facilitates getting to jobs, getting to work, getting to housing, recreation. So there's benefits that are achieved by all of those, and the idea that these 600,000 people are receiving some kind of benefit that offsets the cost of this makes you realize that the billions of dollars, when spread out over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, are really a few cents a day a person.
Sure. So on that point, and to that point, we just spent $8 billion to rebuild LaGuardia Airport. We didn't add an ounce of capacity, but everybody loves the new terminals, and no one complains about the $8 billion price tag, which is an outcome, transit advocates would love, but it's not the world in which transit advocacy operates, unfortunately. So to bring it back as we work down the line, you guys put out a report. It's a version of a report that was completed a little while ago. It was made public. 2 portions of it were made public. The 2 portions that were made public rule out this idea of building a new station under Penn Station in the way that they did under Grand Central. It studied 2 different versions of that. And then it also studied and then ruled out 2 different versions of through running. One of the versions of through running, Foster's not here, so I'll play Foster. One of the versions of through running, basically the version that he cooked up, would have gutted the station sort of entirely and sort of rebuilt it from scratch.
Yeah, and that version was actually based on an earlier version of the ReThink plan that we've discussed with you.
So So
Can I just say one
like
quick,
a complete
one quick thing?
reconstruction of tracks and platforms.
Yeah, so I think maybe one quick thing, another distinction between
Sure.
the ReThink plan and the Tri-State plan was, I believe in the Tri-State plan there was a few terminal tracks remaining, right, Dan? So that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and I'm trying to keep these things as distinct as possible.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to seem like Marvel movies, and you've seen it 5 times already, and we'll all be confused. Don't worry.
So that would be one important distinction, was that in the
Yes.
ReThink plan, the entire existing perimeter of Penn Station was converted to a through-running station. In the Amtrak, in the last version that was published, I think they managed to squeeze in another track or another platform in
Sure.
as well.
All right. Well, then now we're talking
But it was
right. But
much-
now we're talking about a plan that we haven't actually
Yeah.
outlined. So I guess since it's the Amtrak through running proposal, Petra, if you could sort of walk people through what the Amtrak through running proposal would have been and why it was disqualified.
Sure. So to be clear, we did not make a proposal for through running. We looked at the proposals that were out there, and we refined them to make them work, basically, because some of them had fundamental flaws. So we addressed those flaws, and then to sort of evaluate as a straw man, we looked at 2 different versions of the ReThink proposal, and we've sat down with ReThink several times, leading up to the publication of this report, to review and discuss these various proposals. So one was a sort of complete reconstruction of Penn Station, where you would rip up all the tracks and platforms and rebuild a fewer number of tracks with wider platforms. That concept was found to be incredibly disruptive. It would reduce service significantly for over a decade. It would also require additional property takings in the Bronx and New Jersey to build, as ReThink has also proposed, to rebuild turnaround stations and rail yards and inspection facilities. So it's not just a station-focused solution. It would also require additional trackage, removal of grade crossings, compatible equipment. So investments throughout the entire network, in addition to the Gateway program. So that concept was, found to be disruptive. It also was unprecedented from a constructability standpoint. You would have to relocate or underpin over 1,000 columns in Penn Station. And then in the end, it did not deliver the capacity we needed. It provided 48 trains per hour just in the peak, but it reduced suburban service and reduced service in the reverse peak. So people like traveling out of Manhattan into the suburbs, which is also a strong market that continues to grow. So then the second version was more based on ReThink's more recent proposal, which was to deck over tracks and platforms. It was found to be less disruptive, but still disruptive, but fell short of, well short of delivering the transportation capacity goals. I want to say a couple things about through running that we haven't talked about yet. You know, people think about different things. We've sort of, in this discussion so far, framed it as an operating regime for the station, a way to get more capacity out of the station. But it's also, you know, a way to connect markets in the region. And which markets we're connecting, we haven't really covered yet. And, you know, that has to be thought of very carefully. Amtrak and our railroad partners are certainly not against connecting new markets, introducing new services. You may be aware that there's been the train to the game, you know, from Connecticut to New Jersey, you know, for Jets games, and you know, those services certainly could be expanded. But in introducing new through-running services, we have to balance that with existing suburban services, which operate very differently. So I could go on and on. Sure. So maybe I'll pause. But yeah. I just want to say that, like, you do have to think about the value proposition. We were talking about the cost benefit. Like, right. Are we connecting every single line in the region to every other destination? Are we focusing, when we looked at examples of through running around the world, we found that generally they would focus it on an inner portion of the region, say 20 miles from the central business district. They would introduce new subway-like equipment that has, say, 12 feet of door space with 4 openings, versus the suburban rail cars that come into Penn that have 2 doors, you know, totaling like 5 feet of door space, double levels, you know, over 1,000 people on each train, require very different dwells, have very different operating characteristics, which ultimately influence all the dwells that we're balancing at Penn Station. So one of the things we looked at in trying to make these through-running proposals work, like, okay, we'll focus it on the inner region, that it was displacing suburban services that people rely on. And ultimately, Penn Station is this balancing act between 3 railroads, soon to be 4, 3 territories, soon to be 4, 3 different, you know, different types of service: intercity, high-speed, commuter, and commuter that's reaching out 120 miles from the center of the region. So the examples that we reviewed generally followed a model of expanding track capacity, leaving the legacy train hall that balanced all these different types of services intact, and introducing a regional metro-type service with subway-like cars into the new tracks. And that certainly is a possibility with the Gateway program, and if we expand the track capacity at Penn Station, is that you would introduce a through-running service in the future.
So there's a lot there. And I think I just want to sort of, if we can just we'll take it and we'll pause it there for a second. There's the third set of through-running proposals, which, as Liam noted, is effectively an MTA plan that was developed and shelved, stapled together with a New Jersey Transit plan for the South End that was developed and shelved. This was not included in the Amtrak analysis. Why not?
Yeah. So that again was not a plan or a proposal. It was an attempt by our consultants to evaluate through-running proposals that had been out there to try to make them work given the, you know, the operating characteristics of Penn Station, which may not be available to the general public, and then evaluate whether they met the goals of the project. So yes, I'm aware that during that CACWAG process 2 summers ago, the MTA sort of put together a straw man. It was never a proposal. There was no detailed design behind it or funding, but it was found not to be workable as well.
Well, I guess sort of the question is, the plan was evaluated. It generated capacity. The New Jersey Transit Plan gets you up to, this is where I warned you all this was going to get very numbers heavy. So the New Jersey Transit Plan is a backup plan. The New Jersey Transit Plan was what happens if we can't get Penn South built in time? Can we build something smaller and make a bunch of other changes to the south
I'm
end of
sorry,
the station?
I'm not familiar with what
The
New Jersey
the
Transit.
PCIP, I put it on my column and we talked about it
Okay,
at the
so
time.
Nolan leaked some draft studies, or not, you weren't the leaker, you reported on leaked studies.
That's my job as a reporter. I'm
Totally.
sorry.
No, I'm not refuting that at all. That is your job. Thankfully, we live in a democracy where we have reporters who can write about things. So, anyway.
We have someone from the government here. Let's not, we can't get her in trouble.
Nolan
let's keep
has
going.
some sources and tends to get draft studies before they're fully baked and before they're issued. And I'll say, he reported on a study that I worked on a couple summers ago that had early versions for Penn Station capacity expansion. We never released those concepts because we weren't satisfied with them. They did not meet our goals. They took too much property. They didn't deliver enough capacity. And so you got a draft report, but we never published it because we didn't like those plans. So when you're referring to the New Jersey Transit Plan, that's a similar type thing. That was a draft study. They never published it. They never put it in their capital plan. They are not moving forward with it. So I just want to be careful about how we talk about these things. You should hope that the railroads are doing a lot of planning behind the scenes before they spend billions of public dollars, right? If we weren't,
I agree wholeheartedly
you should be
as a
afraid.
reporter.
And so if you get early copies that we haven't, published, it's probably because we are not going forward with those.
Rachel, you talked earlier about the importance of transparency and making sure that every step of this process is transparent and that the public has real insight into what's going on. I mean, we're talking not just about billions of dollars, we're talking about blocks of Manhattan. And more importantly than that, we're talking about the ability to get tens of thousands of cars off the street every single day, improving quality of life, the quality of air in our city, making everybody's life better. So I guess my question is, as a reporter, and to not lay it up for the witness before the judge and the grand jury. But I mean, when you hear about plans getting cooked up and plans, maybe we're not going to consider them in tandem, or we will consider them in tandem, or what does that say to you about the planning process? Is this something that's been open and inclusive? And would you like the layup to keep with the sports metaphors because nobody watches sports?
So I do think that this is something that's been studied for years and years and years. I started following this in 2018 only, full disclosure. So that's 6 years. So I would say that transparency when we are looking at the older. I'm going to talk about Penn Reconstruction, not the other project, apologies. I know that that's the hotter topic today, but when we're talking about the Penn Reconstruction project and the transparency of it under the former Governor Cuomo administration, you had a community engagement process where the materials were not posted online. We had to foil them, then they eventually got posted online. And
you guys had to go to court for that, right?
We didn't go to court. We did a little bit of a shame tactic with Empire State Development. But I think that, from my perspective, if something is being shared with community advisory groups, it's good enough to share with the general public. I will say I have noted with the new advisory committee, the SWAG, which is, Eric Adams would approve, perhaps. The Station Working Advisory Group.
We can't do politics.
Yeah, I know. The Station Working Advisory Group, the committee materials are online, so you can actually look at them. You can actually review them. But I think where the rub is sometimes a PowerPoint isn't quite enough, and you need to get the information that comes behind that. And it gets very complicated when you start talking about draft plans and plans that are released to the public. I mean, I actually think there is value in draft plans being shared with the public because then the deliberative process can be better understood. Researchers can get their hands on them and evaluate them and kick the tires on them too. Journalists can. So I generally I like the leaks as well because I think it actually helps to give more context for the public. I think that in general, there shouldn't be a concern that the public will make wrong assumptions. I think that we should look at these things in the reverse way, and that the more the public sees, the better we can have a sense of what's happening. And I will say, at least with the Station Working Advisory Group, The plans and the presentations are online this time. I'm glad I didn't have to do yet another FOIL request.
So, I mean, just before we do sort of the questions from the audience, is if we could, just sort of 30 seconds from each of you, just sort of what you make of the conversation tonight and what you make of the status of the plans regarding Penn Station. And we'll start, we'll work our way sort of this way in, if we could. Take it away.
Sure, yeah. I think that one of the big questions that you started with was the value and the importance of these 24 trains an hour from New Jersey and doubling that capacity. And a big piece of what we're looking at for through running is what is the value of that compared to the value of creating a through running system for the entire region, where you can have a lot more variety of one-seat rides through Manhattan across some of the advocacy I've done. We've spoken to folks in New Jersey who wish they could have better access to the labor pools in New York. So creating that kind of access might have and we believe this has a much greater value, creating the markets that Petra referred to earlier, where the value of that, we believe, is a lot more than 2 or 3 more trains from New Jersey to Penn during the peak hour.
Sure. Liam, 30 seconds, and I mean it. The floor will open if you don't.
This is fundamentally a governance problem. There is no one in charge to force this to happen. It's relying on the goodwill of the railroads to look beyond their individual interests and political constituencies to do something for the benefit of the region, which we have been trying to do since the 1950s, and it has failed every time. So without some type of unified governance structure or framework or agreement, you could have every technical solution to every problem that Amtrak raises, and it would still not be completed. So I think that's really where the fundamental advocacy need is, more so like through running is the solution, but governance is the means in which to get there.
Fair enough. And Petra, 30 seconds for a response, rebuttal.
Yeah, so to the value, the New Jersey commuter market has grown over 500% since the mid-90s. Amtrak just finished its best ridership year ever in its history with 33 million passengers in fiscal year 24. We are trying to provide rail service where the riders are, and we believe we have a good understanding of it. So that's the reason to address the trans-Hudson capacity deficiency first, get people out of their cars, give them the service they want to ride, as opposed to a theoretical potential market of city pairs throughout the region to be connected through running, which may be in the hundreds or thousands today, could potentially grow over time, but compared to a New Jersey to New York market today, which is just under 500,000.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank CUNY for hosting us. I want to thank Layla for organizing it.